It's a funny place to be, stuck in a seemingly mundane world with an inner knowing that the universe is so much more than our mortal minds can comprehend. Yet we all have the capacity to know peace and our oneness with the wholeness of life. And through these interviews, discussions, and reflections, it is my intention to share this possibility. I'm Ryan Kurzak, and this is the Kriya Yoga Podcast. All right, recording to the cloud. Good. All right, Mitch, we'll fire away.
Okay, so yeah, let's start out with my first question here. So it's more of, and some of these things that I'm going to ask are maybe less questions and more of just like, hey, what's your opinion on this?
Okay.
So the first topic I just wanted to kind of bring up was this idea, and I know this is talked about quite often, but this juxtaposition in a lot of the yogic literature and even just in teachings and conversations about the idea of control versus letting go. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of what I read and what I've heard is like, okay, you need to control like everything. You need to control your senses and your mind and your plans and your actions and your impulses. But then, equivocally, there's all of this content of an idea of, but you should let go. You should let things just unfold and not be attached to any outcome. And so I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on this distinction between control and also letting go, and maybe a little bit, if it makes sense, of where discipline fits in with that and the concept of discipline and
Right.
whether that's, how that differs or is the same to control.
Right. Well, that's a very good question. And being a yogi who, for the first part of my time practicing yoga and meditation, really listening to Mr. Davis, Roy Davis, and considering what he had to say, I understand this need to, in a sense, control things, because Mr. Davis was very much of the mindset that our life should be orderly and we should have routine and things. You should be able to be a forward or an optimist and someone who looks to the future with plans and moves towards those plans. And I was very much into that, and I understood what he was saying, but eventually life caught up with me, and there were certain things that occurred that I could not control no matter what. Like, it was completely beyond future planning, being optimistic, and these sorts of things. So I've thought about this a lot, and essentially it kind of boils down to this. If you have a well-organized life and if you're taking care of yourself, you are more likely to miss a lot of the problems that someone who is thoughtless or careless or isn't really being conscious of how they're living their life. And that doesn't mean you're going to miss all of the problems, but it means, if, for example, you understand that you need to control yourself so that you don't drink a whole bunch of alcohol and then go driving, well, if you understand that, then you're less likely to be in an accident and kill someone or get a DUI. You still may be in an accident, but an individual who doesn't seem to think about that at all and doesn't control their alcohol consumption when they drive, then they're more likely to experience something like an accident or a DUI or something of that nature. In the Bhagavad Gita and in many yogic texts, there is this emphasis towards non-attachment. In fact, if you really read many of these texts over and over again, what you see is the statement that the yogi is meant to do essentially whatever work is put before one, and to do it as well as one can. And so one needs to be able to, in a sense, train oneself or figure out what does it take to do something well, such as meditating well. But at the end, it goes on to say, but you do this without attachment. You do it freely. You do it of its own accord, not because you want to get something out of it. And the reason this is so hard is because the human mind needs reasons for things to be a certain way. And so in the beginning, most of the time, we're going to find that individuals need some kind of structure, or need some kind of guidance, or need some kind of, how would I put it, some kind of path to follow, because that keeps them focused and stable, such that they're not getting distracted by everything that comes along, and then they're able to internalize their awareness and realize why it's so important, why non-attachment is so important. So the difficulty is that, yes, there are many things which we cannot control in life. There are many things which we can't help, but there are quite a few things which we can help. And so when it comes down to practicing yoga, essentially all we're doing the best we can. That's all we can do. We can just do the best we can. And the best we can is practicing the yamas and niyamas, conserving our resources, not wasting our time, being truthful, being content. We do all that because it contributes to our greater capacity to know what we really are beyond the mind and the body and the personality. And then once you know what you are beyond the mind, body, and personality, one naturally lets go of the attachment to things going a certain way, or to the need to control things. But they also recognize that, if we're going to have an experience in life, it really helps out if we have certain boundaries that we follow just to keep things together. Does this make sense? And is this answering your question? I feel like I went on some different directions there.
No, that's perfect. I'm trying to tee you up to go on different directions. So
Okay. Okay.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think you spoke well to the not only the idea of control but also discipline, which I think is a lot of the undercurrent of what you're talking about, and then where letting go, comes into play. It's
well, right.
So
and we can think about it. We can think about it very mundanely, and we can also think about it in these kind of lofty spiritual realms. I mean, from a mundane standpoint, if I decide that I'm going to get a job and I'm going to save my money as best I can, well, I am less likely to have financial problems. Okay. However, it may be that I save all my life and, some big financial problem comes up that I just can't handle. However, we don't know if that's going to be the case, but up until that point, most of the time, things are going to be managed well. And when it comes to spirituality, we have to control our minds. We have to control our minds because, I was recently reading a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita by Lahiri Mahasaya, and he says when you go into meditation, you have to make sure that you are giving no attention to the idea that something external to you can make you happy. And you have to discipline yourself to pull within, to let go of those ideas that something external to you can make you happy, such as, oh, well, maybe I should stop meditating so I can check my phone. Well, there's an idea that by doing that, that's going to contribute to your happiness. Or maybe I shouldn't be meditating. Maybe I should be doing something else. It's another distraction. However, once you discipline the mind to let go of all of those distractions, well, then you can let go. Because you've put so much momentum towards pulling within that once you let go, that momentum carries you fully inward, and you don't have to be pedaling anymore. You don't have to be pushing anymore. It just naturally happens. So in the beginning, yes, one has to work on this idea of discipline until they get it. Again, like being a musician, you can't just pick up a guitar and go play with professional musicians and improvise things. You have to discipline yourself to learn the scales, to play the notes right, to intonate them well, such that when you show up, no one's going to look at you and have that look in their eye like, geez, I wish you'd quit playing. You've done the work. You've got the discipline. Now you can fly. Now you actually know what you're doing. So we can look at it on many different levels, but there always will be that sense of you learn it, and then you let go. You learn it and you let go. And that's a consistent process that seems to keep happening.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think of that even in terms of creativity. About 5 or 6 years ago, I quit my job kind of on a whim, honestly, because I was very unhappy in the position at the time. And I thought, well, this is going to be great. I just need to be free and I'm going to be so creative and awesome. And oh my God, I can write 1,000 books because I'm going to be, have no obligations or responsibilities. And, what I found during that time of essentially being unemployed was that I had no freedom, no creativity, nothing. And I think that when that security goes away, that you're not really able to let go. And what you're saying, I guess, is you kind of use a little discipline, use a little control to construct stability. And then within that framework, you let go and just let things happen naturally. Yeah.
Right. And even with that idea of creativity, when I first thought I was going to be a novelist, I did what I do on all things. I decided to read about how to write. And I remember a quote, it might have been from Stephen King, but it was essentially that inspiration is for amateurs. That inspiration is for amateurs, because the professional, the one who's the serious writer, gets up every day and writes for 3 or 4 hours or longer. Even if they think they're writing total crap, they do it anyway. And and it's the same thing with being a successful yogi. If you think you're just going to meditate every time you're inspired or it feels good, just forget it, because the whole point of the process is learning to go beyond this idea of when you feel good about it or when there's an inspiration there. It's about, no, the self is there all the time, and I need to learn to access it in all states, whether I'm happy, sad, neutral, content. We get there no matter what. And when we train ourselves to do that, then eventually it doesn't matter how we are feeling in an external level, we still have the capacity to go meditate and experience it. So the idea of inspiration being for amateurs, that is true in my mind across the board.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think that's really cool. That's really smart. And I agree with that. Consistency is key. All right. So I think that sufficiently answers that for me. So thank you very much for elaborating on that.
Sure.
So something else I was wondering is if you might be able to say a few words on this concept of selflessness, and how it relates to, either the Kriya path or just sort of spiritual enlightenment in general. I read a lot about selflessness, obviously, and I know Mr. Davis talked a lot about selflessness. And so I'd kind of be interested to hear your thoughts on that and the importance of selflessness and how that relates and ties in with all of this work that we're doing.
Right. And that's kind of a charged word in some ways, because many people can interpret it in different ways, and oftentimes they might interpret it in ways that it wasn't really intended from a yogic perspective. And from what I've read in Mr. Davis's work, when this idea comes up, essentially the biggest problem we have is an overinflated sense of self or egotism, or I guess egotism is a good word. And we have to be very, very, cautious with this idea of selflessness, because sometimes we can think we're being selfless when really we're just trying to build up a sense of having other people see that we're selfless. It's like individuals who they're bleeding hearts for every situation that comes along, and it's not necessarily because they have an innate urge to be of help to situations and places. It's because they want to be seen as selfless or caring or like a Mother Teresa or something of that nature. So essentially, when it comes to being selfless, really the way I look at it is acting from a place of inner poise and inner, how would I put it? Acting from a place of inner poise and inner knowing, and not acting from a place of trying to get one's own needs met or trying to build up a certain idea or sense of self through being kind, caring, or giving. So essentially, this requires a person to learn to meditate until they are aware that they are not their mind, body, personality, thoughts, preferences, attachments, and aversions. And then when a situation arises, ask oneself, what is the appropriate thing to do here? And if the appropriate thing to do is to help someone, well, then you do it. Not because you're trying to be defined as a helpful person, but just because it is kind of like the innate urge or the innate expression of this infinite consciousness of which we are a part. And that's a hard thing for many people to get to. So when we talk about selflessness, we also have to realize that selflessness is more so about acting from a place related to the greater good or the greater understanding or from the whole. However, the difficulty that the human mind has with that is that we've been trained to think that the way we do that is by completely giving up any ideas of self-preservation, or if someone needs money, we just give it to them freely, or rather than pulling back and kind of contemplating, well, what is the right thing to do here? Is it right for me to bail this person out right now? Maybe it is. Or is it right to let them learn from whatever experience they're going through? So this idea of selflessness, I think it's very subtle, and the more we know what we are beyond the mind, body, and personality, the more we recognize what it truly means to be selfless. So,
right.
Does this? Is there any way I can clarify that, or where were you when you thought of the words selflessness or being selfless? Where were you taking it?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, I think what you're saying is also important, because I've read often that there's actually no such thing as altruism.
Right.
And everyone's kind of doing something for gain. So perhaps on a more mundane level, just simply being truly selfless and trying to maybe find a way to achieve that. I think a follow-up question that I had, which I think goes, dovetails very nicely from what you just said, was that, again, to bring up, Mr. Davis again, is I know that he spoke and wrote often about what he would call purposeful evolutionary processes, and how awakening is beneficial for the total evolution of consciousness, like for everyone,
Right.
And not just having this sort of, I believe he would refer to it sometimes as almost like a selfish desire to awaken, but instead to have this selflessness to understand that awakening and kind of becoming God and self-realized is actually beneficial on an evolutionary process, or on an evolutionary level, I suppose, of consciousness.
Well, right. And it's funny you bring that up, because I was actually just getting ready to write an article on that for the Patreon community.
Cool.
Mainly with the idea, I haven't written it yet, so this will help me work it out in my head. Mainly the idea is that, when we meditate, we're not doing it for ourselves. In the beginning we are. In the beginning we might be depressed or anxious, right, or think we want to know God. And sure, we have that idea that that's why we're doing it. But ultimately, we're all like little transistors or little, fuses. I don't even know electronically what I would use there, but we're all like part of this. We're all part of this computer. And so let's say I'm doing my best to meditate. And let's say I never experience what they describe as nirvikalpa samadhi, but I've done my best, and I have experienced peace, and I have been able to rest in that stillness, but I never had those blazing lights, or I never had all that fantastic descriptions that many people provide to get you to read their books. And but maybe I never had any of that, and I pass. My body passes away. However, that activity that I was doing, that I was engaged in, if I wasn't concerned about myself at all, and I was just doing it because it was the thing to do, it was the natural thing to do, that activity, sure, it's benefiting my own sense of individualized soul, but it's also helping all these other thousands and millions of people across the planet and whatever realm they're in, to recognize just a little more precisely, a little more subtly what they really are. I mean, anyone who's been meditating over the last 100 years, we've seen we can talk about meditation on podcasts. We can talk about
Mm-hmm.
meditation just about anywhere. My parents went out to dinner for New Year's with some of my relatives, and I was feeling kind of antisocial, so I didn't go. But
Mm-hmm.
I heard the next day that one of my relatives was asking, "Hey, I heard Ryan's a meditation teacher, and I need to learn more about this." So my parents, who probably don't even think about meditation, are now having conversations about it. Why? Because more and more people are discovering the value of it, and whether they're doing it well or not, hopefully they are. But the more that happens, the more the whole becomes more easily able to appreciate, number one, what the yogic path is, even if it's skewed in the beginning, but they're beginning to appreciate it. And eventually that contributes to individuals' abilities to process those higher states of consciousness, because it's moving in that direction. Whereas 100 years ago, maybe let's say there were 200 people on the planet that really were doing it well. And these are just numbers I'm pulling out of nowhere.
Sure.
and then 50 years ago, now it's up to 400. And now it's so well known that maybe there's 10,000 people who are learning to start to meditate well and see the benefits of it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
that idea, if we look at our meditation that way and we let go of our attachment to having certain experiences and focus more on, well, what are the mechanics of doing it well, and how can I master that beyond my inspiration and actually do it consistently? Well, that's contributing to the whole. And the less we think about what we're going to get out of it, the better. And so that, in a way, is, in a sense, selfless meditation.
Right. Yes. And sometimes I think of it almost as, I don't know how you would think of this, but I'm a very visual learner. So a lot of times I come up with visuals to like help me. I think of it almost as like all of humanity, but even just all of this manifested sort of reality, if you will, pushing together this boulder up this hill almost.
Right.
And it's just, the more people join that group, the quicker we're all going to be able to wake up or get that boulder up the hill, versus maybe just like 10 people or 10 beings trying to do that. So.
Right. It's like we're an ant colony, and we're trying to drag that grasshopper back to the nest. And the more ants that chip in, the better. And some of those ants might not survive, and some of those ants might not even get a taste of that grasshopper. But the fact that they were doing their duty, well, then the whole benefits from it. So it's a funny way to look at it, though, isn't it?
Now I want to go watch A Bug's Life.
Well, since we need to be talking about vegetarianism, well, then what I mean to say is the leafcutter ants were dragging back giant leaves.
No grasshoppers were harmed in the making of this podcast.
Exactly. Even if they died of natural causes.
Right. Oh, that's super funny. So, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And again, I think that it definitely expands on the idea of selflessness too, and what that can mean, even at a more esoteric level.
Well, and if people have difficulty with that, well, that's a clear sign that you've got some work to do. If someone hears what we've just said and like, well, I want to have these special experiences, and I want all of this. Well, how old are you? I mean, what's your mental age that you're feeling with this kind of work that you by yourself are meant to capitalize on it and get something out of it for you. I mean, that's the whole emphasis towards much of this work, is that it's a mistaken sense of self. And so that is why it always makes me laugh when people write to me and they say, Sri Yukteswar is my favorite in the guru lineage. I wish I could have studied with Sri Yukteswar. And it makes me laugh, because I listen to them talk and I'm like, yeah, you would last probably less than a day in Sri Yukteswar's ashram, because he doesn't care about your personality. He doesn't care about making you feel good about yourself. He wants you to meditate well. And many people, they don't quite grasp that. And then they think, oh, well, this teacher is mean or uncaring or whatever it might be. When no, I mean, sure, there are probably teachers out there which are abusive and real jerks, but the ones that are essentially interested in your understanding of yoga, they're not going to cater to your personality. They don't care what you want. As in,
Mm-hmm.
they don't care what your personality wants. What they care about is that you are waking up and that you are getting clear insights and you are letting go of attachment to this little you that has all these preferences such that you can do your duty, So anyway, I've been reading Sri Yukteswar's book, The Holy Science, again, and I've gotten a few more emails from people saying, I wish I could have stayed with Sri Yukteswar. And every time it makes me laugh.
do you really?
Yeah.
They'd be kicked out of the anthill.
Yeah, that's for sure.
That's funny. Yeah. So, okay. So my next question, this is going to be probably my most metaphysical question, but I think it's rolling into what we're just talking about. And you said, hey, we're all kind of part of this computer, and we're all really the same, part of the same consciousness. And this is a burning, I would say, my burning question of the conversation that even as a child, I was always trying to wrap my head around, and still to this day, feel like I'm very close to understanding it, but hasn't clicked yet. That realization moment hasn't happened yet. So my question is, what is the relationship between people and perspectives? Like, sometimes I get this weird sense that this entire bubble that we are apparently living in is just a figment of my own imagination. Almost like my personal dream that we're in, and perhaps even the players in this world or in this life that I'm seemingly interacting with are maybe not even, they seem to have their own personalities or whatnot, but maybe it's all just, maybe a figment of my own imagination. And so I guess the question would just maybe be to understand a little bit better about the relationship between all of the little, I guess the yogic literature would say the little jivas, the little individualized units of soul consciousness. Is there overlap? Are we all, we all have our own perspectives, but how does it all mesh together?
Right. Well,
I suppose
your understanding would jive very well with many of the ancient seers' ideas of what's really going on. And that is that there is one consciousness, and it is interacting with itself through all of these seemingly individualized perspectives.
Right.
So that is something that I think you will find. Hold on, there's a loud truck going. Oh, it's a motorcycle. Anyway, hopefully it didn't come through very much. But many of these ancient seers agree with that idea, and I also most of the time get that idea, get that sense.
Mm-hmm.
The trouble that we have talking about this is that it's very easy for people to take it way too far in a way it's not intended to go. Okay.
Right.
So when we think about it, we do have to remember that the human mind can never comprehend what you're trying to comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why through meditation, you learn to withdraw your awareness from your mind so that you actually can get the direct experience of what you're describing. And once you have that experience, again, this is the best words can be used, is you'll come back and you'll say, oh, well, it's almost as if I am everyone and everything, and I'm just kind of like flowing through each of these individual bodies. And then the reason it becomes difficult is because then it can be, well, why would someone do this horrible thing to someone else if we're all the same, right? And that's where we start going down this rabbit hole where the mind is going to create all these reasonings and rationalities, and we're going to lose our understanding of what is true about it. So when we're contemplating this, the only thing we can do really is to trust those teachers or those seers who have said this is so. And then what we can do is we can meditate, all right, well, if I was not this body, mind, personality, how does this work? And in that case, then you will actually catch probably a glimpse or an experience. And how can one even imagine or describe processing, say, 1,000 consciousnesses at once? Meaning, if right now, all of a sudden, you became aware of 1,000 different personalities and perceptions, how would you be able to interact with the world? How would you be able to, what do you think your experience would even be like, right?
A schizophrenic.
Yeah, right, exactly. You can't, it's inconceivable. So that's why through the practice of meditation and yoga, we learn to go beyond the concepts to have the direct experience. So that's how one has to realize that, and there's nothing that can be talked about. I was talking with an individual who's going through a very difficult time, and she said something like, "How could God let this happen?" And again, having gone through some difficult times and looking back on them, we don't ever really know the real reasons why certain things have to happen. Why does someone have to die? Why does a difficult thing happen to this person? Why does a good thing happen to that person? Why do we have to watch someone suffer? Why do we suffer? Well, we don't know what those experiences, how they're impacting those other perceptions or those other awarenesses around us. Maybe a child loses their parent to a disease, and that inspires them to go on a path of becoming some type of healer or doctor, and then they end up being very beneficial in the lives of thousands of other people. We don't know why that person's parent had to die so young, but maybe it was for some reason for this child to go through that pain such that they could be of benefit to even more people. Now, these are things which we don't really, there's no proof of. We can't even really talk about it in any sensible fashion. But again, it all comes down to this idea that based on what you're asking, if you have an idea or you have a realization that you feel you're kind of on the cusp of, well, that's a good example of when you hold that general idea and you contemplate it, and then you go into meditation and you let go of as much of your preconceptions of it as possible and see what the actual experience that comes to you is. But it requires that you have to let go of all of your preconceptions. And again, that is why we need that discipline early on in meditation, because if we can't let go of our preconceptions, there's absolutely no way we can understand these grander viewpoints, which is why when a mystic speaks or an ancient seer speaks or a master speaks, 98% of the world thinks they're crazy or doesn't understand what they're saying, because they cannot grasp anything beyond what the mind is capable of. So part of meditation is learning to remain sane while learning to let go of, at the times that are appropriate, your concepts, definitions, and what your mind typically says the world is all about.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, even in my own meditative experiences, I've had many moments where, well, I won't say too much because I don't think it's healthy to talk about one's meditation experiences, but it's almost as if I get to a certain point and instead of, I think just reality is very fickle. And you get to a point where you just feel like there's just the thinnest layer, the thinnest veil that can just be lifted at any moment.
Right.
And that ego, that fear kind of steps in and is like, whoa, I don't know if I'm ready to lose that sense of individuality.
Right.
And I think that's where that whole concept of letting go comes in as well. In the highest sense of the definition of it.
Well, again, that's the importance of early meditative training, is that it's teaching you that it is safe to let go.
Right.
And even when we think about the yamas and niyamas, okay, well, the yamas and niyamas say to be truthful at all times. Well, you have to go through the painful experience of being truthful at all times. And once you do that enough, eventually you recognize, hey, I'm still existing, even though I'm being in my truth. And I'm not telling these little white lies, or I'm not being inauthentic like I used to be, yet I'm still in existence. Or the idea of contentment, practicing contentment. If you really practice contentment, and what you learn is, hey, all these situations came and went, and I practiced contentment, and I didn't complain about it, and yet I'm still here and I still exist. So that's why the yamas and niyamas, not even talking about meditation yet, are so important, because they are the initial training ground that allows a person to see, wow, if I commit to one way of living, my world's not going to fall apart. If I break down, I still exist. My ego doesn't need to play all these little games with myself. And then one learns that one is safe. One can still continue to move forward. And so with meditation, as you learn to internalize your awareness and let go of this problem, that problem, if you're able to say, all right, for an hour, I'm not even going to think about this relationship issue, or I'm not even going to think about the fact that, I just overdrew my bank account, or I've got this health issue. Then you get through that hour and you recognize, wow, I went a whole hour without worrying about that at all, and I'm still here. You see?
Right.
And then eventually one starts to recognize, well, wait a minute, maybe I can actually live my whole life not worrying about these things, and it's still okay. Now, I'm not saying you don't take care of the things you need to. I'm just saying the worry, the attachment to the worry goes away. And then one learns that one is safe. So the same thing is true with meditation. When you get good at internalizing your awareness, then you see, oh, I've let go of all these other things, so maybe now it's safe to let go of this thin veil, this small sense of self, and see what happens. So it all builds upon itself.
Yes, I think that's really important, and that's really beautiful to think too, of this idea of safety. And again, like we almost started out the conversation of talking about constructing the stability and safety so that you can let go.
Right.
So yeah, I think the ego's biggest fear is non-existing. So
exactly.
that final piece is difficult to work through, but
well, it's going to happen one way or the other.
Yes.
Whether
the whole evolutionary process.
Yeah, it's either going to happen consciously, or you're going to be driven into so many circumstances that you just suffer through it and you recognize it, or you just end up losing your body and then you get it anyway. So, it happens one way or the other. And part of our role with this meditation path, it seems to mean that we learn how to do it consciously so that we don't have to be forced into it.
Yes, right. And yeah, because the universe, if you don't feel them gently tapping you, then they'll resort to pushing you down the stairs.
That definitely seems to be the case sometimes.
Well, we try to get your attention by waving across the room, but you just weren't looking. So,
well, it's like this 18-year-old that I've developed a relationship with. I'm trying to get her to do some chores, and I started out with, "Hey, I will pay you to do these things happily, stuff around the house, like an allowance," and then it went to, all right, well, for some reason, kids these days don't seem to care much about money, so it moved to, would you please just help to contribute, just to be a part of the family and help out. And so far that's worked. And when it wasn't working, I said, I really hope we don't have to take it to another level.
Right.
So maybe that's a natural structure of the universe as you're describing.
Yes. Well, people are resistant to things. So yeah. And I think that, to just pick up on something you were starting to talk about a little bit, where you're going to come to this realization one way or the other, and it might be by losing your body. And one of the questions that I had was, this idea of actually contemplating death and the role that can actually play on the spiritual path, and how, you know, it's something in my life where actually and I don't mean this to be super dark and morose and all of that, but it's just a simple fact that, you know, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, you know, we're all going to die at some point.
Right.
And so contemplating that, you know, how do you think that can be helpful, I guess?
Well, you know, I wished I had
path.
contemplated it a lot more and early on in my
Mhm.
life, because, you know, when my wife Melissa died, like that would have been, maybe, I don't know, you know, we can never say with how things would be if things would have been different and so on. But,
Right.
you know, that was one of the things that was most impactful for my going back and digging deeply into the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras, and recognizing that, you know, nowhere in the Yoga Sutras or the Bhagavad Gita does it say, you know, you do this and your life's going to be perfect and you're not going to have to worry about anything.
Mhm.
You know, there's this focus on, again, non-attachment, and that the yogi endures pleasure and pain while one seeks out knowledge. And so if one is able to contemplate death, it is my thought that then they're able to, hopefully, eventually, if they do it profoundly enough, they see that, wait a minute, you know, everyone dies. I'm not really my body. This is going to pass. And if that was more present in our awareness, it seems like we would give a heck of a lot more attention to the profoundness of our meditation and our yogic practice, because you know, you don't want to go through that kind of pain of discovering that the hard way, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so if you're able to see it, and it really drives you to question, well, what am I really? I think it gives a little more life to the spiritual path, and it gives a little more life in general to life. You know, not having ever contemplated that stuff before, well, now I can be in relationships with people and I can love them and I can appreciate them, but I don't look at them as any kind of source of ultimate fulfillment, because I know that either I'm going to go or they're going to go, or something's going to happen. But then that creates a greater, I think, love in the moment for what is really going on right now. And so I think the idea of contemplating death or loss or change, that can put things into perspective, and it can put things into perspective in a way that might bring a greater sense of integrity to one's life, or it might bring a greater sense of awareness and presence to every moment of every relationship one has. So I think that it would be, I mean, well, you know this, in the second year of the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program, you know, I posted that video on, what was it? Like dying well, I think.
Right.
And the reason I did that was because, you know, when you start contemplating people dying well, what you recognize is that those people who die well are practicing, consciously or not, yogic philosophy. And if that's the case, then we could learn a lot from the death process and the idea of impermanence. And, you know, our culture, the way that we've, maybe not everyone, and I'm sure not everyone, but at least what I have seen, there's often been this kind of glamorization of yoga and spirituality, as though that's like the key that's going to fix everything. And I think that's a real shame, because if you think there's a key that's going to fix everything, well, then you're playing another game, saying that this is the trick to make something permanent. And really, the idea of yogic processes are to see what you really are, the true you that is eternal and permanent, and to see that temporal, or that fickleness of the ups and downs of the world, see that in perspective, such that you don't get pulled into it, and you don't believe that is the only thing. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, and I was just, you know, digesting that. I think that's really important. Yeah, the impermanence of life it's
right. You make peace with that. You make peace with that, and you're probably good. I mean, think about it. Imagine if people lived so close to nature, where they saw death and they saw decay and they saw the seasons changing. They recognized that, you know, one year crops are going to be good, or one year, you know, game is going to be good, one year it's not. And, you know, imagine someone who's so in tune with it, and they're not afraid of it. They're not fighting it. They're not saying, geez, I wish it wasn't this way. If they were just embracing of the fact that this is the experience one has when one is in the body. And then when death would come, if they had been embracing that all their life, then likely, I don't know yet, but likely then they would say, all right, well, this is just part of the process, and what comes next comes next. So if people were able to grasp that and really get behind that rather than chasing all these other things, that would bring, just by itself, I think, a greater sense of peace and connection, and that sense of yoga and oneness that we're kind of aiming for with all these meditations and philosophies and processes and so on.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I know that sometimes when I contemplate death or just the ending of this realm of consciousness, again, this is more of a feeling, more of a theory. We probably don't need to go too far into it, but it's just, I sometimes have this overwhelming feeling or sensation that it's already happened. It's so impermanent that it's just fleeting. It's just like sand. Like, there's nothing to be fearful of, because it's basically, it's all happening at once, kind of.
Right.
And so, but that actually leads, it doesn't make me feel sad or anything. It makes me feel alive and happy and full, to think of that. And,
right. Yeah. And you can really only do that when you've let go of the definitions of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say let go of the definitions of the mind, I don't mean stop thinking, because you're going to need to think every now and then. I just mean when you stop giving the ideas of the mind so much power. This person should be healthy. This should be this way. This political situation should be like that. This shouldn't happen. We should be able to maintain the sense of comfort indefinitely. Those kinds of things, and they're not based on fact. I mean, I was just recently reading a book on sort of the banking. I wasn't reading a book on the banking system. I was reading a book on sort of the state of humanity, and they were talking about how with the banking system, that all that is based on imagination. The imagination that the future will be better than it is right now. That's why banks can loan you money they don't have. Whereas, let's just say 1,000 years ago, that's not how it worked. You only could get something if you went and took it from someone else. So there was a limited,
right.
there wasn't unlimited credit available to everyone. And that's a radically different way of looking at the world. And I think imagination is very useful, and I'm very happy with the way our economy is allowing people to live the way they are at this point in time compared to 1,000 years ago. But ultimately, we always do need to come back to that idea of reality, of impermanence. And the Buddha talked about that, and it's all over the place in the Gita and the Yoga Sutras. It's just that it doesn't sell a lot of books for someone, to talk about how impermanent and fleeting the world. I'm sure there are probably very many best-selling Buddhist writers and those sorts of things. But in general, I can remember teaching classes on Kriya Yoga and bringing up these ideas, and the classes are packed. And then I start getting into the deeper aspects of non-attachment, and people get a little squirmy. And then there's maybe and then there's maybe like 2 or 3 people left that are really intent on meditating well and really understanding what this non-attachment thing is.
Right.
Well, but it could also be that I have poor charisma after 24 hours, so that's a possibility too.
I would not describe you as someone with poor charisma. So
Well, when you come to the retreats, I mean, you've driven a long way, so you can't really get away. You kind of got to sit it out.
That's true. Yes, but I just am very good at falling asleep with my eyes open.
Yeah, your plane ticket. It's anyway.
So funny. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I have one more question, and then I have 2 sort of very light questions that I think we can kind of end with. So,
sure.
So I think this is interesting to ask you as well, knowing that for a long time you actually made your career out of astrology.
Yeah.
And this is what does sell well, right? These do sell a lot of books. Understanding
I was
your
a very
soul's
successful
purpose.
Yes, I was a very successful astrologer.
Yes, you were. Yes. And I think this idea of, what is your soul's true purpose in life? Like, what is your true purpose? And I was just wondering if you could comment on that of, do you think that there's actually a true role or purpose that each individual is here to fulfill or, kind of play out? Or is it really just a little bit overhyped, and at the end of the day, it's just do your thing, and the ultimate purpose is just to sort of make your way back to God, essentially, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and that's there's a lot of levels to that question. And it was part of the reason why I eventually got out of astrology the way I did.
Right.
Because I loved astrology. I thought it was a beautiful science. I still do. I think it's very helpful in certain ways, and it's got a lot of power behind it. Yet, what I found was that people kept asking me this question about purpose, and it's because they watch too much TV. Because my response would always be, well, your purpose is to do what you're doing. And that's not a good enough answer, because people don't think that they're fulfilling their purpose unless they're impacting a large number of people, unless they're famous, unless they have everything that they want. I mean, that's a large part of what people seem to be wanting me to tell them when it came to astrology. And again, my experience going through losing a spouse and a few other situations and learning to appreciate life in a different way, it came down to the idea that I would see many of my astrologer friends go through difficult times. I mean, serious stuff like death and illness and really heavy things that people go through. And rather than actually being in that experience, they would run to their computer or run to their charts and say, well, let's look at the transits that are causing that. And I said, you know what? You're completely missing life, because your sister just lost her baby. Why don't you go cry with your sister and let that be your purpose for now? Don't go run to your charts to make yourself feel better about, oh, well, it was just this transit making it happen. So I became a little kind of disgusted with how I saw people missing their actual life, because what they were ignoring, were what they wanted to ignore, it seemed to me, were the bad parts of their life by explaining it away through something like astrology.
Interesting.
So that being said, I had remembered, I don't remember if this was a quote I read in one of Mr. Davis's books, or if I heard him say it one time, but he said Yogananda had mentioned that the purpose of life is much different than what everyone thinks it is. And that stuck with me for a while. And then again, the more I read the Gita, the more I read the Yoga Sutras, the more I recognized. And someone recently asked me, well, what is the yogic definition of success? And I recognized the yogic definition of a successful life is realizing what you are. Yes. It has absolutely nothing to do with how famous you were, how much money you had. Did you have the perfect relationship? Did you get through life with 0 diseases? Did you help millions of people? That is not the definition of a yogic successful life. The definition is, are you able to abide as the self? And so that's one of the reasons I pulled very quickly away from astrology, because right before the 6 weeks before Mr. Davis passed, I visited with him. And for years, I had said to him, I think I want to give my full-time attention to teaching Kriya Yoga. And he would always say to me, well, you still need to be able to pay your mortgage, and you're not going to be able to do that teaching meditation because it's not that lucrative of a business. And he looked at me and he said, and you're not very good at cleaning yourself up and playing the game. And playing the game. So he said, so, keep doing your astrology as your service and your duty, and to be able to pay your bills, and then teach Kriya Yoga to the people that you're able to. But then that 6 weeks before he passed, I had no idea he was going to go. But I had moved back to West Virginia. My expenses were a little lower. So I said, this is the time. I just turned, it was a few months before I turned 40. And he just looked at me and said, sounds like a good idea to me. So then that's when I decided, okay, now it's time to take all these kind of ideas and thoughts that I had and really put it towards helping people see and engage their life with as little fantasy as possible, and to do my best to share the yogic purpose of life, which is to know what you are. To know what you are when your spouse is dying, to know what you are when you've got the business that you want, to know what you are when your children are getting married, to know what you are when you've just had a major setback, to know what you are at all times. If that can be maintained, because life is always going to rise and fall. I've met many people who are extremely wealthy and successful, and they were on the spiritual path, and their wealth and their success did not contribute in any way, shape, or form to their sense of happiness. It prevented many problems that they might have otherwise had if they were in poverty, but they were no more enlightened than someone who was in poverty and was actually doing the work. So that's when I started to recognize that the emphasis needs to be on knowing what you are, so you can be present in the moment, doing your purpose, whatever that is, whether that's, us just sitting here now having a conversation. That's going to impact some people, maybe, who knows, but I'm enjoying it. Whether it's being at home cooking chicken soup for your daughter who needs it, that's a perfectly good purpose to have. Whether it's mowing grass, whether it's doing business on the stock exchange, if that is your duty and that's what arises in your experience to do, that is your jiva purpose. That is your individual purpose as this greater whole, so that the wheel keeps turning. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that the one who does not do one's work freely, this is a paraphrase, who does not do one's work freely to keep this world sustained is essentially like a thief, because they're not participating, they're not playing their part, they're not playing their role. And I got to say, I completely forget what the original question was.
I think, actually you're answering it. I mean, I was just asking, about your perspective on, is there this soul purpose or, divine role that everyone's truly meant to fulfill? Because I think there's so much emphasis on that in our culture and our society that I think a lot of people lose themselves just in the quest for finding this perfect,
right, exactly,
path, I suppose.
So yes, I would say that that yes, there is a purpose, but it may be that you've done your best in life and yet you still suffer like a dog. That might be your purpose. It may be that you're just going through the motions, doing what you need to do, and that is your purpose. Not everyone can have these profound purposes. It may be that you have one bad relationship after another, and it may be that the point of that, the purpose of that, is such that you recognize that you are not to define yourself by your relationships. People think, well, I'm failing because I'm not finding the one. Well, maybe you're failing because you're not recognizing that these are prime lessons or prime examples. I don't like the idea of lessons, but prime examples, opportunities, such that one can see, hey, maybe I exist, or maybe the real me doesn't need to be defined by whether I'm with the one or not. Can you imagine that? I mean, imagine if someone had that kind of mentality, and you go tell them that. You got to be prepared for it. And again, just like we were talking about with previous experiences, you don't want to be forced into situations where you recognize that. So if we learn to practice non-attachment, contentment, and the yamas and niyamas ahead of time, well, then essentially we're going to be set up just right to navigate whatever this purpose is that we have, however grand or however mundane it might seem to our minds.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so true. I recall Paramahansa Yogananda said at one point, obviously not to me, but I think I heard it somewhere, I read it somewhere. He said, don't regret what you lack or the kind of work that you do. Be satisfied and find God. So I think it's, it's like, don't worry about it so much. Just focus on maybe more of your macro purpose
exactly.
as a jiva or whatnot.
And that is why we're here, and that's why we're having this conversation, because it's, that's more of that is the most important thing. Because if you get that, all this other stuff, it's not it's not going to bother you chronically as much, maybe acutely every now and then. but you'll be able, the ideal is that we're able to then see it in perspective, and we make it to the end with maybe a little bit of a smile.
Yes. Love it. Okay, so I've just got my 2 sort of freebie questions,
Okay.
here at the end, and then I think I'll probably around that hour mark anyway. So
Yeah.
So it's almost like a 2-part question. So what is the biggest mistake you see people making on the spiritual path or on the Kriya path? And then what is the biggest piece of advice you'd have for someone on this path?
Wow. That's a that feels like that feels like a harder question than all the others that you've just asked.
Oh. That's awesome. Save the best for last.
Yeah. Well, let me think about that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that's hard to answer is because everyone is really kind of different in where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are way too caught up in their social engagements. Some people don't really care about that at all. The thing that I would say, well, actually, ask the question one more time.
Mm-hmm. What's the biggest mistake you see people making on, this path? And then maybe what's the biggest piece of advice you'd have for someone on this path?
Okay. All right. Well, I have the idea about the mistake. I don't think the advice is going to make much of a difference, but I'll try. From my life experience with this work, and what I've seen interact with many people and just kind of watching people live their lives in general, I really think the biggest mistake people make on this path is expecting something in this world to satisfy them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the biggest issue that people have. And even when people turn to spirituality, they are then just doing the same thing where they're expecting a spiritual philosophy or idea to satisfy them completely. So it boils down to the idea of they're looking for something to attach themselves to that will finally give them peace. When really the ultimate peace seems to come from not being attached to anything at all. And those people who kind of get a sense of that, who do well with it, sometimes they take it a little too far, and then they don't actually engage in the world. So the key is to engage in the world as if it matters.
Right.
So
yeah,
that's one of the things I think, that if more people would really stop and contemplate that and think about how that can be done, recognizing that is not an easy thing. It's not something you're going to go to retreat for a week and get it by the time you're done. This is something that you mull over a lot, you contemplate a lot, and you test out and you explore how it can be done until one gets the hang of it. Yeah. So the biggest issue I see is thinking that one is going to find happiness through something. And a thing can be even an idea or a person or a guru or things of that nature. And the solution to it is to actually do the work that is described by masters or teachers or in spiritual texts, such as doing the work of actually trying to practice contentment in all circumstances. Or when it comes to meditation, rather than sitting down and being like, well, gee, this is going to be relaxing. Yeah, sure, it's going to be relaxing, but that's not why you're doing it. Learning to sit down and say, all right, this is a skill like anything else. How can I sit down and focus on these meditation techniques, and then in time kind of slide into or remain alert and aware while being completely free, completely internalized? Really get in there and do the work to figure out how it happens, just like riding a bike, figuring out how to ride that bike. So really it boils down to the sense of recognizing what is real, what is permanent, what is impermanent, what is real, what is the unreal. That is the biggest issue. Because if you deep down inside knew that nothing in this world is going to satisfy you, you're really not necessarily going to get long-term bent out of shape about many things. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
When
Right.
a problem arises, sure, maybe that's going to frustrate you and you have to deal with it. And if it's a long-term problem, yes, that might be longer. But most of the time, that's why we learn to practice contentment, so we don't have to get to that point, and we can learn to roll with life as it happens. And everyone's going to be different. Like for some people, the idea of death might be the worst thing in the world. So they might have to find ways to come to terms with that. For other people, it might be being homeless and having zero money, or it might be, as we talked about, not having the perfect relationship. So we all have these areas where we have a fantasy about, such as if this were right, then everything else would be good. And if we can learn to address those fantasies head on and see what we really are beyond all of those fantasies, that's what I think all spirituality eventually points to. And that's why I think that is the ultimate aim and goal of human life, because everything that we experience is put here for us, it seems to me at least, is put here for us to provide that opportunity. Like I don't have a crazy attachment to define myself through my children, not having children, but through children. And so that issue doesn't come up for me. But there are other people that are so engrossed in defining themselves through their children that their children cause one problem after another, and they wonder why that's the case. Well, it's a perfect opportunity there to learn what is the reality of how are you defining yourself, through your actual innate infinite spirit, or through a thing or a body which came into being and which will eventually go away. That's where our suffering comes into play. So the goal obviously is to move beyond this sort of petty suffering that most humans seem to experience.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's wonderful. So, I mean, basically you'd say, that some of the biggest mistakes are thinking there's almost like a silver bullet for happiness or for fulfillment. And then maybe identifying a little bit, being overly identified with the unreal, as opposed to, and getting kind of caught up in trivial drama, versus focusing on reality in the truest sense.
Right, exactly. In the unchangeable sense, and we have that with meditators and Kriya practitioners all over the place. People write to me, "Oh, well, do you teach this Kriya? Do you teach this meditation technique? I've been doing this for 10 years. Now I need a better technique." Well, again, what are they doing? They're just looking for that next silver bullet. And there are plenty of people that will sell books with those silver bullets, when really the whole path is it's living. It's your life. Your life is your path. And how well are you living your immortal life or your eternal life? And that's all that can be structured very well by following yogic principles and procedures. But again, remembering that yogic structure is there to help you process higher consciousness. It's not there for its own sake. It's there for, in the same way that good dirt and sunlight and fresh water helps your roses to grow. It's the rose blooming that's the important part. How it happens, that's the support to it. And there's no silver bullet. It's not the water. It's not the dirt. It's not the sunshine. It's the combination of all the things that make it work. That's life.
100%. Yes. And that might be why. And that might be why some texts, specifically, I'm thinking of Ashtavakra Gita, says almost considers meditation to be a trap, because it's
we can talk about that. We can talk about that, because I know John mentioned that to me a few times, and I've read multiple versions of Ashtavakra Gita since then. And if you read the paragraphs before it starts to talk about those things, you will see that it's also saying it has its place until it doesn't. It's saying that you learn to meditate such that you can abide in that state. But once you are abiding in that state, you don't keep cranking through your Kriya pranayamas. You don't keep doing your mantra. So that's a good point. You brought that up, because I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking that.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
Right.
And then, do you have a piece of advice? Or is it sort of the culmination of everything we just talked about?
I believe it's the culmination, because there's no one piece of advice that's going to be useful for all people. But you can tell. I mean, ultimately, a person can tell what work they need to do essentially by paying attention to what bothers them.
Yes.
Or where they think that if they just had this one thing that then everything would be okay. That is the attachment. That is the immediate response to what am I attached to, and what is the work I need to do, and how on earth could I exist in a contented fashion if I didn't have this? And if one can contemplate that and get to that, then they're really going to be hitting that deeper level of the work, from my perspective, a little harder than most.
Right. Yeah, I love that. That's wonderful advice. Well, this has been, for lack of a better term, enlightening conversation.
Well,
I really appreciate you answering these questions. That's pretty much all that I had.
okay. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on out and have this chat with me. As you know,
Sure.
well, maybe not. I don't know if you know, because maybe you didn't get the email, because it didn't seem like many people did. In the year 2 of the Kriya Yoga Apprenticeship Program, I essentially said to people, hey, if you would like to be on the podcast and interview me about questions that you have, please do so. And no one responded.
It's so intimidating.
Well, I thought maybe someone would have, public speaking capacity, and you do, so that's why I picked on you, and I guess you agreed.
Ryan bullied me.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Cool.
But anyway, well, thank you for taking the time to be here, and just for people to know how to find you as well. We've done a podcast before on my other podcast, and you've got the website instinctualwellbeing.com, right?
Yes. I still maintain that website, and the previous podcast that we did, that would be kind of a fun listen, probably. So thank you.
And I do refer people to you every now and then. And by refer, what I mean is, Mitch has an interest in good dietary practices to help people be as healthy as possible. So occasionally when someone asks me about that, I tend to point them in Mitch's direction. So I'll go ahead and I'll put your website down on the notes section here too, so people can find you if they need anything.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you for being here today, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Okay, take care.
This episode of the Kriya Yoga podcast was made possible by donations from Kriya Yoga apprenticeship students and supporters of our Patreon community at www.patreon.com/Kriya Yoga.